Well, sometimes. I mean, it varies.
Well, I wonder, I was going to ask you, when you said you wake up in the morning and you start to work, does it ever happen that you wake up, you draw something, it takes you 20 minutes and it's done?
Yes.
And how often does that happen?
Not enough. This is about the 10,000 men who are, the idea is that they will aid the police in combating this violence that Philadelphia is trying to deal with. And so I just tried to get at, you know, how powerful are guns, how powerful is the gun culture, and how powerful are 10,000 people, and can they do anything about it? This is more a drawing than.
It's not necessarily, it's not clear what it's saying, it's just laying things out, as it were.
I guess so, yeah.
Here's one that is pretty pointed,
Right.
excuse the pun, with Blackwater and Uncle Sam.
Correct.
Could you talk a little bit about this cartoon and what led to it and what it's about?
Well, we have outsourced a lot of our tasks that are military tasks to companies like Blackwater. These are tasks that were once performed by the military, and the idea was that they would bolster our military, and it turns out that this has been counterproductive.
Now, did this one come to you quickly?
Well, this one, a lot of the ones that are visual like this come when you just start drawing the elements that are involved in an issue. And as you play, which is what it is really, one thing leads to another, and you get a cartoon.
What does that mean when you say you start drawing the elements involved?
Well, you draw, you know, I mean, in this particular case, what are the elements? Blackwater, the U.S. military, the U.S. government, the State Department, outsourcing, and it's just a matter of, okay, what do you think about this? How can I express what I think about it? And if you can come up with an arresting way of depicting reality as you see it, then that makes for a good cartoon, I think.
And this is a very interesting one, I think kind of a bit more complex, or one ruminates upon it a bit, where you have the various steps or gradations toward acceptance of various groups.
Right.
And gay marriage is illegal, but it's already moved beyond
past
unimaginable and ridiculous.
Right, right.
And it still has to get past offensive, acceptable to equality with other groups.
Right.
Really, very wonderful point. I know you have not been a stranger to controversy on the Enquirer, and I guess no political cartoonist ever is, but you certainly went through quite a storm at the Enquirer, and I wonder what your role was in it with the Mohammed cartoons, and if you could tell us a little bit about what happened and the decision that was made about publishing that.
Well, it's interesting. There was a heated argument going on among the top editors of the paper about whether or not they should publish one or several of the cartoons that had been commissioned by a Danish editor on Mohammed. And I did not know anything about that. I wanted to do a cartoon on the subject, and so I included in my cartoon one of the Danish cartoons.
Without knowing about the content?
I had no idea.
Huh.
I just didn't even think about it, of course.
And then what was the upshot of that?
Well, in terms of protest?
Yeah, and I guess from the newspaper itself as well as from
the newspaper published one of the drawings also a day later, I believe, with what I thought was a fairly namby-pamby attempt to justify it, as if justification was necessary, which I don't think it was. You know, if a pictorial image of Muhammad is blasphemous, it's only blasphemous for people of the Muslim faith. And I mean, if we could talk for probably another hour about the whole problem of those cartoons and the Islamic reaction to them, but I people have died because Western Muslims make movies and someone somewhere judges this film to be an affront to Islam. And I mean, it's outrageous.
So at some point, one has to not ignore
Well,
some
we
of this
have to
controversy.
figure out some way to stand up to this and say, no, these
Yeah.
are Western values that are important, and freedom of religion. We all believe in freedom of religion, but we also believe in freedom of speech.
Okay. Well, I want to switch gears and talk a little bit about your other work, which is illustrating children's books. You have done drawings for Daniel Pinkwater's new edition of the Hoboken Chicken Emergency.
Right.
And you've done other illustrated children's books before. I wonder how you came into that area and how it compares for you for the much different world of editorial cartooning.
Well, it goes back to my childhood interest in fantasy and adventure. So in a way, it feels like coming full circle. It's very enjoyable work. It's very different, and it takes so much longer for a project like this to reach fruition than it does for my drawing to appear in the next day's paper. You get a manuscript. If you like the manuscript, you may do some preliminary drawings. Then you talk about whether or not you'll do it. Then you begin working on it, and you may go down a road that doesn't work out, and you'll come back and go down a different path. And the end of this process may be a year and a half after you've begun it.
Do you work with the author, in this case Daniel Pinkwater? How does that collaboration work?
Well, this book, the one I just illustrated with Daniel, is a 30-year-old book. This is the third edition. Daniel illustrated the first edition. His wife illustrated the second. And now Simon & Schuster wanted to come out with a third edition celebrating this 30-year, never-out-of-print children's book. And they wanted new illustrations of a very different type. So, and Daniel and I go back a long ways, and it was very enjoyable to do this.
Do you talk about how it should be illustrated? Do you simply do it and then he looks at it and says, I like that, or maybe you could change this?
No, well, it wasn't a collaboration in that sense. Daniel knows my drawings very well, and once I began the book, he was really kind of out of it. I was sharing some of the drawings with him, but it's a different task. A collaboration of the type you're talking about might happen if both the author and illustrator are in on a project from the very beginning, and jointly talking about what would you like to draw, what time period shall we put this in, things like that.
But this book had existed.
Oh
and
yeah,
had been
this was
around
an
for
already
30 years.
existing book.
Okay. You have lived in various parts of the country. You were born in Ohio, you lived in Southern California, then you came to Philadelphia. Do you think you have a sense of America that informs your cartooning?
I've never thought about that. We're so linked now in terms of information that I don't think so. Cartooning and is like writing in a way. It's a lonely craft, and it's not fiction in the sense that you're drawing on your background in terms of where you grew up. And also, I'm trying to speak to a broad audience.
But I wonder if, having lived in those places, it doesn't give you a broader sense or a more universal sense of things,
Maybe
a less sectarian sense.
I have no idea, but maybe it does.
Yeah. Do you ever feel blocked? Do you ever have days where you can't create, or you figure out something, or you have days where you do two, and so or three, and you can then go back to your staff?
Well, there are days when it's a very target-rich environment, and I come up with several, but usually I struggle to get one. I mean, it's hard work, and I've never come in intending to do a cartoon and not done one, but on days where it goes until noon, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the afternoon and you still haven't come up with one that you want to do, that's a hard day. And if those days were very frequent, I'd be in the wrong line of work.
Because it would get stressful.
Well, it's just, it would mean I wasn't cut out to do this, basically.
So hopefully you're done by noon, you can have a nice lunch and then sort of do
Well,
what
no,
you like in the
the execution of the drawing may take anywhere from a minute to 4 hours, depending on what you've chosen to do. And you never know that either.
Could we end with your telling us some other cartoonists that you particularly admire, whether they're alive or dead?
Oh, that's a long list. Very important to me when I was first discovering this were Paul Conrad at the LA Times and Pat Oliphant, who then was at the Denver Post. Also Herblock, Jules Pfeiffer, Bill Malden, and also some New Yorker cartoonists and children's book illustrators like Quentin Blake and J.J. Sempe, Saul Steinberg.
Very wide range.
William Steig.
Styles.
Well,
Well, what would you say they have in common?
the political cartoonists perhaps don't influence you or me as much in terms of style as ideas. And the later artists that I was talking about are more influential in terms of style. You know, I think it was, a renowned portrait artist was asked recently on the anniversary of Rembrandt's 300th birthday. What did you think the first time you saw a Rembrandt painting? And he said, well, I thought, so what's the big deal? And the interviewer was taken aback and just couldn't believe it. And he said, you've got to understand, when an artist looks at a work of art, if the artist they're looking at isn't working on the same kinds of problems that you are, then suddenly you're just looking at it as a regular bystander. It's the artists who you identify with or who speak to you on some really gut level that are going to be profound influences, and because you're kin in a way. You're both.
You understand.
You're working on exactly the same problems and how to deal with them stylistically and things like that.
Okay, well that's very illuminating, and I want to thank you very much for joining us today, Tony Auth.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you.
And thank you for joining us at the Drexel interview.